Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? This ain't murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight's show, we're going to be talking about what were they thinking? The show was suggested by Bill Lahr, who sent me a video called The Killdozer. Bill got the video from Dan Hart, so he gets credit for coming up with tonight's show's idea. Hopefully Dan Hart will listen to the show, and maybe he'll enjoy it and tell all of his friends. Marvin Heemeyer was born October 28th, 1951, in South Dakota. He lived in Grand Lake, Colorado, which is about 16 miles away from Granby. Heemeyer moved to Grand Lake more than 10 years before the incident that would make him famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it. His friends said he had no relatives in Granby, the Grand Lake area. John Baldry, a friend of Heemeyer, said that he was a likable person. Heemeyer's brother Ken stated that he would bend over backwards for anyone. But Christy Baker claimed that her husband was threatened by Heemeyer after refusing to pay for a disputed muffler repair. Baker said her husband later paid Heemeyer $124 via an intermediary, so evidently the dispute was more of a misunderstanding. Whether any threat was ever actually made, well, we don't really know. In the early 1990s, Heemeyer moved to Grand Lake, Colorado, bought a few acres of land for $42,000, and opened his own muffler repair shop. He was widely regarded as a fairly jovial, blue-collar guy, working on the land he bought to make a living with his own two hands, as people in rural Colorado community tend to do. A government can't leave anything alone without stepping in to change things, usually for the worse. Heemeyer ran into a zoning dispute with the town government. After 10 years of operating his business on the 2-acre patch of land Heemeyer owned, plans were approved to build a massive concrete plant right on the edge of his property. This plan proved to be a serious issue for Heemeyer, as the only access road to his business crossed directly through the planned concrete factory, meaning neither he nor any of his customers would have access to his business. I've run into things like this before. A rancher would decide nobody was allowed to drive across their property. Ranch owners who needed to cross this piece of land to get to their own ranches would find themselves unable to get through. A judge would have to step in and declare an easement so the second ranch owner could get to their land. Well, sometimes the first ranch owner would not abide by the court order. Things would get interesting. Shots would be fired by one or both. Well, Heemeyer took the matter to court, trying to get an easement so people could still get to his shop. One small muffler shop trying to fight a ginormous concrete plant. Who is going to hand out the biggest gifts to make folks making the final decision lean in their favor? We elect people to office so they can look out for our best interests. Then somebody comes along with a big bag of money And the elected officials start saying things like, it's in the best interest of the public, or the greater good for all, which is just another way of saying your rights aren't as important as those with lots of cash. The court did not find in favor of Heemeyer. His plea fell on deaf ears. The court system is supposed to be blind to anything except for justice for all. That's why Lady Justice is shown holding a set of scales while wearing a blindfold. Justice is supposed to be equal for all, but sometimes people get more than their share of that equality. The town wasn't happy with the small business owner making waves, so they hit Heemeyer with a bunch of fines for not being hooked into the city sewer line, even though, in order to do so, Heemeyer would need an easement onto the concrete plant's property to hook into the sewer line. He was also fined for having junk cars on his property. The town council didn't have a problem with these cars until the dispute had come up over the road. Well, the town hit Heemeyer with $2,500 in fines, and his business was shut down due to the road being closed. Some folks say Heemeyer made a deal with the concrete company to sell his land for $250,000. The story says Heemeyer wanted more money to sell to the big company. The cement company balked at the $100,000 increase. True or not, things got interesting after this. The story is very dynamic. The claim is Heemeyer then changed his amount to $500,000 for 2 acres of land. This begins to sound like the cement company was trying to sway the public into thinking they were the victims of unethical landowner. Ever heard the saying, don't get mad, get even? Heemeyer said, I was always willing to be reasonable until I had to be unreasonable. Sometimes reasonable men must do unreasonable things. Thinking himself as being between a rock and a hard place, Heemeyer decided he'd had enough. The town council was not going to help him out. The courts were not being as just as they should be. Heemeyer decided it was time to fight, not using laws, but force. He found a buyer for his land, somebody who wasn't making concrete. Although the term cement and concrete often are used interchangeably, cement is an aggregate of concrete. Ingredient. Concrete is based on a mixture of aggregates and paste. The aggregates are sand and gravel or crushed stone. The paste is water and Portland cement. Well, Heemeyer used the money to buy a bulldozer, a Komatsu D355A bulldozer. Over the next 18 months, Heemeyer built makeshift armored vehicle. He put metal plates all over the driver's area. Then he put more plates over the engine. No sense in protecting the driver if the engine was going to get shot out of commission. In some places, the armor was a foot thick. When I was a tanker, we would sometimes have to button up. This means closing all the hatches. In order to see where we were going, we had vision blocks, also called periscopes. These were a very thick glass with a mirror set at an angle. Then there was a second mirror lower inside the tank. You could see out, but the enemy couldn't shoot you. If the vision block got damaged, we would yank one out and replace it with a spare that was kept inside. Heemeyer went one step further. He mounted cameras all around the outside of the Killdozer so he could see in every direction. He also put in compressed air nozzles underneath the cameras to clean off dust and dirt so he could still see once things got messy. The cameras were placed inside 3 inches of bulletproof glass. While he was tweaking his design, people from the town came by to talk to him. Heemeyer was surprised they didn't look at his creation and ask, "What the heck is that thing for?" In some places, instead of steel, Heemeyer used concrete to reinforce the body of the bulldozer. Have you ever looked at photos of Tiger tanks from World War II? The Germans built some of the best tanks on the planet. One innovation used was activated armor. Look closely at photos of actual Tigers from 1944. The sides look textured. This was because they used slabs of concrete to layer over the steel. When a high explosive round would hit the concrete would explode outwards, leaving the steel intact. I sometimes wonder, did Heemeyer study the German tanks? To make his armored vehicle that much more threatening, Heemeyer installed gun ports all around. He had a .50 caliber rifle, along with a few smaller rifles and handguns. The driver's cab was air-conditioned as well. Might as well be comfortable while running amok. The hatches on a tank can be a weak spot. You need to be able to open them from the inside and the outside. There is also the weight. A very thick hatch would be too heavy to open. Heemeyer did away with hatches. Instead, he built the driver's armor in one solid piece. He hooked it up to a crane that he can control from inside the dozer. Once the armor was lowered into place, there was no way to get out or in. Heemeyer wrote a lot while he was building. He said, "I think God will bless me to get the machine done, to drive it, to do the stuff that I have to do." He also said, "God blessed me in advance for the task that I am about to undertake. It is my duty. God has asked me to do this. It's a cross that I am going to carry, and I'm going to carry it in God's name." On June 4th, 2004, Heemeyer was ready. He clomb up into his bulldozer, and he used a remote control to lower the armor shell down into place. He fired up the beast, and he drove it right out through the wall of his former shop. From there, he drove directly into the concrete plant. Once he had demolished as much of the concrete plant as he was capable, he headed for town. In town, he went to the office of the local newspaper, the Sky High News, which had published a number of editorials critical of his side of the zoning dispute. Well, he took care of the newspaper. He also went to the former mayor's house, and he drove back and forth demolishing it. What he didn't realize was the mayor was not home. He had died before Heemeyer arrived with his monster. Police were called to the scene of destruction. At first, they tried yelling at Heemeyer to stop what he was doing. This was followed by shooting at the vehicle. The officers tried to find gaps in the armor to put rounds through, not knowing that Heemeyer had sealed the tank up very tight. The next course of action was to try taking out the cameras. They shot at the thick bulletproof glass. Once more, their best efforts were at a loss. One of the biggest dangers to a tank while in the field comes from infantry that gets in close. You can't defend against anybody standing close by because the guns are all set to shoot away from the hull. In the book Tank Sergeant, Ralph Zumbro tells about being a tanker in Vietnam. As they were going into a hot zone, if the enemy got in close and boarded one of the tanks, they would call on their wingman. That's a tank that would assist the front tank. They would ask them to clear the decks. This was done by spraying the hull with .30 caliber machine guns. The small bullets wouldn't do anything to the tank, but they would remove any unwanted riders. I had a copy of Tank Sergeant back when I was a tanker. I read it maybe 6 or 8 times. Other soldiers in my unit would borrow my book from time to time. We did tend to be just a little bit cheap on occasion. One day, Lieutenant Aaron asked to borrow my book. I loaned it to him, figuring, well, I know where he works. A few weeks later, I found out the lieutenant got transferred to Germany. Well, I was a little upset. I may have said a few things about second lieutenants, such as, what's the most dangerous thing in the Army? Oh, that would be a second lieutenant with a compass. Things like that. About a month later, I received a package from Germany. Lieutenant Aaron had found my book in his things, and he mailed it back to me. He was by far one of the better butter bars. I hope he made it to colonel or general or something good like that. Well, back to Heemeyer. The sheriff's deputies tried to stop the Killdozer by using another earth-moving equipment. These vehicles could only slow the beast down, but by manipulating the bulldozer's blade, Heemeyer was able to push these vehicles out of his way. A sheriff's deputy, Glenn Trainer, managed to climb aboard the armored vehicle. There was no wingman to clear the decks. He rode around on top of the dozer looking for the hatch that didn't exist. The deputy tried to find some opening he could use to stop the rampaging monster. Finally, he was forced to jump down since the Killdozer was still crashing through buildings and debris was falling on top. Heemeyer went in and destroyed the town's library. There had been kids inside, but authorities evacuated them before the Killdozer got too close. Heemeyer drove through the town's newspaper office. Literally. The paper had taken the wrong side in the debate, as far as he was concerned, and, well, he took out the newspaper. In all, his rampage claimed 13 buildings before the punctured radiator began to cause trouble for Heemeyer. Then, he dropped one of the tracks off into the basement of the Gamble's hardware store. As the surrounding police descended on the vehicle, they heard a pop come from inside the vehicle. This was a single gunshot. Heemeyer had shot himself. The authorities tried to use explosives to breach the Killdozer, but the armor was too thick. Eventually, they brought in an acetylene cutting torch, and they used it to get through the armor so they could retrieve Heemeyer's body. No one, aside from Heemeyer, was killed that day, though police say there was nothing but luck to thank for that. Heemeyer reportedly took shots at the police vehicles and even propane tanks using the weapons on board. He had more than enough means to have killed folks, but nobody was seriously injured. It looks to me as if Heemeyer was out to destroy the town, but not the people. He managed to do over $7 million worth of damage to the town. In hindsight, it would have been far cheaper to allow Heemeyer to have his easement, but that is 20/20 hindsight. Who would have thought a small businessman was going to build a Killdozer and then take out most of the town? Today, Heemeyer has a devout following of anti-government online communities that see his story as one of part hero's journey and part cautionary tale. The story of a man who was pushed so far that he chose to push back, even at the cost of his own life. In other circles, he's seen as a troubled man who chose to turn to violence when life didn't go his way. Was Marvin Heemeyer wrong in what he did? Well, you're not supposed to drive around town destroying things just because you're mad. However, did the town have the right to destroy a small business so they could put in a bigger business that would bring in more tax dollars? Had this taken place back in 1776, Heemeyer would have become a revolutionary hero talked about in history classes today. People say you're not supposed to take the law into your own hands, but what do you do when you've exhausted all avenues of respite only to find the system is stacked against you? Hero or villain, you can decide for yourself. People just love a good underdog story up until they find themselves going up against one. Then the little guy becomes a criminal or a miscreant. They did make a movie about Marvin Heemeyer. It's called Tread. You can find it as well as a few books that were also published. Where else? Amazon.com. You can also get a shoulder patch or a sticker that says, "Tread on those who tread on you." There was a movie called Killdozer that came out in 1974, based on a short story by Theodore Sturgeon that came out in 1944. The movie is about a small construction crew on an island that is being terrorized by a spirit-like being that takes over a large bulldozer and then goes on a killing spree. If you want to read a really good book about tanks in Vietnam, check out Tank Sergeant by Ralph Zumbro, which is available from Amazon.com. You can get the hardcover for $10.75 or paperback for $5.59. I really enjoyed reading it several times. Well, what do you do if you want to drive around destroying things, but you don't have the means to build your own armored vehicle? Shawn Nelson was born in Birdseye, Utah, August 21st, 1959. He was the second of 3 sons, the middleman, if you want. He grew up in Claremont neighborhood of San Diego, California, and graduated from Madison High School. Once out of school, Shawn enlisted in the United States Army and was sent to Fort Knox, Kentucky, where he became a 19 Echo, or tank crewman. From Fort Knox, Shawn went to Germany. If you're in a tank unit, you either went to Germany or Korea. He served for 2 years until his honorable discharge in 1980. Then Shawn returned to San Diego and took up working as a plumber. Apparently he was pretty good because people would call the company and ask specifically for him. Nelson's mother died in 1988. This was followed by his wife of 6 years following for divorce in 1990. Then Shawn was involved in a motorcycle accident that landed him in the hospital, where he ran up a pile of bills. Shortly after getting out of the hospital, his father died. Nelson sued the hospital for $1.6 million, claiming they were negligent. He also accused them of assault, battery, and false imprisonment. Hospitals can't keep you there if you want to leave, no matter how bad a shape you're in. If you say you want to leave, you can. You sign yourself out under what is called an AMA, or Against Medical Advice. Once you leave, anything that goes wrong it's on you. A Superior Court judge dismissed the case, and the hospital countersued for $6,640 in medical fees and the legal expenses. Nelson claimed he was forced to be treated without his consent. This is a sticky situation. If a person is injured so badly they're not considered to be competent to decide, the hospital can go ahead with treatment. The hard part is determining if the person is not able to say no. I've had patients fight me while I was trying to help them. If they had a bad head injury or were having diabetic problems, they were considered not competent to refuse treatment. You have to be up on your laws and keep really good records. Shawn Nelson's brother Scott said that he became addicted to methamphetamine in the years prior to his tank incident. Shawn was using anything he could get his hands on to relieve the pain from his injuries. Meth doesn't really relieve pain, but it masks it. His neighbors complained to the authorities they would hear Shawn yelling at his roommates late at night. Nelson began exhibiting unusual behavior. On one occasion, he dug a hole 15 feet deep in his backyard in an attempt to find gold. One of his friends, Carson Honings, referred to the mine shaft as Nelson's new hobby. In April, he filed 2 damage claims against the city for police negligence and false arrest, totaling $2 million. In 1994, somebody broke into Shawn's truck and they stole all of his plumbing equipment. This, combined with his neck and back problems, seemed to push Shawn over the edge. He began talking about maybe taking his own life. It got so bad that his new girlfriend left him in 1995. Remember the Oklahoma bombing? It happened April 19th, 1995. As Shawn Nelson told a friend of his, Oklahoma was good stuff. 168 people were killed from the blast, but Shawn was impressed by the news coverage. Some people look at devastation and think about how it gets the culprit's name out there and not all the lives that are lost or ruined. There was no evidence of any connection between Shawn and any terrorist groups, but he did like all that 24-hour news coverage. He liked the drama and the notoriety. At dusk, approximately 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday, May 17, 1995, Nelson drove his Chevy van to the California Army National Guard Armory on Mesa College Boulevard. Soldiers were working at the armory late that night, so the front gate was left open. Nobody was stationed there as a guard because nobody ever thought anybody would try to steal anything. With that, I am going to take a brief pause, play a couple commercials, and drink some coffee. Don't go away, I'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your otherworldly needs. Did you go out UFO hunting and couldn't focus on the sky? Swing on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, right across from the Embassy Suites. That's not a weather balloon, that's a flying saucer. Are you taking care of your skin? Or are you going to wait and see how time treats you? Take care today by contacting Lourdes James, Independent Beauty Consultant, at 956-723-3019. Don't let time get the best of you. Coffee, nectar of the gods. And at the Organic Man Coffee Trike, you'll find coffee made the right way, one delicious cup at a time. Stop on by 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back to the show. Now my dog is pulling on my headphone wire. She wants attention. World War I generated new demands for armored self-propelled weapons which could navigate any kind of terrain. In order to be able to build tanks without spies figuring out what they were, the men in charge said they were building water tanks. That's why they needed so much armor plating. The first tanks were called land ships, and they were actually manned by the Navy. They were huge, bulky, and they broke down a lot. The first battle where land ships were used at Flers-sur-Celette. Of the 32 tanks that started out to cross no man's land, only 9 made it to the other side. All of the others either broke down or were stuck in the mud. The tank was originally designed as a special weapon to solve an unusual tactical situation: the stalemate of the trenches on the Western Front. It was a weapon designed for one simple task: cross the killing zone between the trench lines and break into enemy defenses. The armored tank was intended to be able to protect against bullets and shell splinters and pass through barbed wire in a way infantry units could not hope to, thus allowing the stalemate to be broken. Oh, there were a lot of improvements made over the next several years. Nelson had driven a tank for 2 years. It's not really rocket science. When I got to Fort Knox, I was expecting long, hard, intense training. We were issued our tanker's manual. They had to be all of 4 inches thick, but there was no time to look it over, so I set it in my wall locker and we went out and did Army things. That night, I had fire watch. Somebody has to be awake 24/7 to make sure nothing catches fire. It's a good idea in the old wooden buildings with coal-fired stoves, but we were in a concrete block building and still had to have fire watch. I drugged my manual out and I sat down in the hall. I flipped it open to a random page that said, "How to stop the tank." There was a picture, a drawing of a foot hovering over a brake pedal. The manual said, "Push down until tank stops." And there was a picture of the foot pushing down. I flipped back and forth through the book only to discover the text was written at a 3rd grade level. Lots of pictures and very little content. It wasn't until I made E5 that I received the Tank Sergeant's Manual, which was about a 1/2 inch thick. It had all the same information, none of the drawings. Well, the advantage of being an NCO. Nelson clomb up onto the turret, and he dropped down into the tank through the loader's hatch. From there, he crawled into the driver's seat. If the main gun is over the back deck, there's a small opening into the driver's compartment. If the main gun is pointed forward, the driver can squeeze in under the main gun into his seat, but he has to make sure that nobody touches the gun controls or he gets a squishy body. The main gun goes up and down pretty fast, and there's only about maybe a 1.5 foot opening between the breech and the floor of the turret. So, well, if anybody raises the main gun, it would kill the driver if he was there. Nelson tried, but he couldn't get the tank to start. This could have been due to bad diesel, or maybe it was a filter problem. There is a quick solution, but I'm going to skip that, in case somebody out there decides they want to steal a tank. Nelson clomb back up out of the tank, and he moved over to the next one in line. He found the same problem. Tanks are finicky beasts. I've had all kinds of problems getting the starter to fire up. And not to be deterred, Nelson got up on top of tank number 3. As he was stepping down into the loader's hatch, one of the guardsmen spotted him. Well, this didn't set off any alarms because, like I said, nobody expected anybody to try stealing a tank. It wasn't until Nelson got the tank running and began to drive off that men at the Armory began to worry. They called the police. I'd love to have heard that conversation. An M60A3 Patton weighs 57 tons. They carry 63 rounds of ammo for the main gun, which is 105 millimeters. Mounted in the commander's cupola was a 50 caliber machine gun. And mounted right next to the main gun was a 7.62 coaxial machine gun that could be fired by either the tank commander or the gunner. Wherever the main gun was pointed, that's where this machine gun was aimed as well. The M60A1 had a huge spotlight mounted on top of the main gun, but the A3 had thermal sights, so they no longer had the spotlight. If you see a tank and you see a big spotlight on top, it's probably an A1, and if you don't see a spotlight, it's probably an A3. And now it's time for a story. Our unit was always dynamic. That's how the military is. One day you know just about everybody in your company, and the next week there's a bunch of new guys. A platoon in the infantry is about 50 men. In a tank company, a platoon has 12 or 16 men, depending on if they're running 3-man tanks or not. Nearly half of a tank platoon are going to be E5 and above. Both the tank commander and the gunner are sergeant slots. One day, our loader was replaced, and this got me worried. I was the gunner, but I was an E4 at the time, trying to get my sergeant stripes. The new guy was an E5. He outranked me and would probably be put in the gunner's seat, and I'd either be relocated as the loader, or I'd be moved to another tank. This guy had transferred from another unit, but he didn't really know much about tanks. He'd been in admin for years. We were going to take him downrange and let him learn as we went. Now, loading a tank is easy. You shove the round into the breech, you hit the safety forward, and you yell up, which means the main gun is ready to fire. That's about all the loader has to do. I showed him how to do it and had him practice a few times, and then it was time to go shoot. I told the guy the breech was going to come back about 2 feet. It was going to spit out an empty shell. It was going to be noisy, and it was going to be smoky. We rolled along the road until the commander saw the first target. Gunner Sabo Tank was the alert for the crew. The loader flipped the safety off and yelled up. I spotted the target and I said identified, which was telling the TC I was on target and I was ready. The TC said fire, and I said on the way. I get goosebumps just saying all of this. The whole crew wears CVCs, Combat Vehicle Crewman helmets. These have microphones and headsets so we can communicate. The loader and the driver usually keep their mics turned off because of all the noise in their sections of the tank. As I was saying on the way, I pulled the trigger and the main gun went boom. The whole tank, all 57 tons, jumped back about 3 feet. The breech slammed open, spitting out a red-hot empty shell, and the turret filled with smoke. It smelled like burning sulfur, and I loved it. Well, the new guy didn't. He freaked out. He began screaming and trying to get out of the tank right through the wall of the turret. He kinda didn't like being a tanker after that. My slot was secured as the gunner, and I got my stripes. The new guy, he went back to admin. Shawn Nelson stole a tank and he drove it away from the Armory. However, tanks don't sit in parking lots with ammo on board. You have to go to the ammo point, which is not anywhere near the Armory. If you look at images of tanks Shawn stole, you'll see that the main gun is locked in place over the engine deck by what is called a travel lock. Even if he'd had ammo, he wouldn't be able to move the gun around. He could shoot backwards, but that would get him very little as far as rewards go. And he wouldn't be able to aim. All he could do is just fire in whatever position the main gun was held. Nelson led police on a 23-minute chase through the streets of Claremont. This makes most police chases seem kind of lame. Chasing a tank through town. Now that's exciting. Police agencies involved in the chase included the San Diego Police, the San Diego County Sheriff's Department, the California Highway Patrol, and since the tank was stolen from the Armory, they had the military police involved. The tank had a top speed of 30 miles an hour. M60 tanks had a governor on them, so they could only go so fast. If war was declared, the governors would be removed and the tank could go about maybe 60 miles an hour. Due to the tank only going 30, it was a very slow speed chase. There's no stopping a tank as it rolled over the tops of cars parked along the street. Shawn also took down light poles as he came to them. The police looked at the tank and they considered this to be a high-risk situation. Nobody knew whether Shawn was armed or not, and he was inside an armored vehicle. A 57-ton tank easily plowed through road signs, traffic lights, utility poles, fire hydrants, and crushed approximately 40 parked vehicles, including an RV. The damage to utility poles knocked out power to at least 5,000 San Diego gas and electric customers in the Linda Vista neighborhood. Nelson traveled along neighborhood streets, eventually turning north on Convoy Street, west of Balboa Avenue. Then he got onto Interstate 805 heading south. While on 805, Shawn attempted to knock down a pedestrian bridge by running into the pillars, but he failed after a few hits. Once he lost interest, he decided to continue onto the freeway. Nelson drove the tank onto State Route 163, heading southbound, resulting in the freeway being closed and thousands of motorists being stuck. Have you ever been stuck in a traffic jam? Have you ever wondered what's causing the jam? Have you ever thought, well, there might be a tank on the highway? Not the kind of thing you'd think of. Traffic in California is bad enough without having a tank running around. One news article speculated that Shawn Nelson may have been headed to Sharp Memorial Hospital, the same place he'd unsuccessfully sued in 1990, and he may have blamed the hospital for his mother's death. When Nelson attempted to cross into the northbound lanes of State Route 163, the tank became caught on the concrete median barrier and it lost one track. Throwing a track on a tank is bad news. You're looking at hours of work getting that sucker back on. I know, I've had to do it. As he was trying to cross the concrete barrier, he got his tread up off the ground. This is called high centering. It's a bad situation that if the police hadn't been trying to stop him, he could have fixed it in a few minutes. It's a rather lengthy, involved process, but it's not the end of the world if you know what you're doing. However, his tank was immobilized and 4 police officers clomb up onto the tank. A San Diego police officer, Paul Paxton, was a gunnery sergeant at the time in the Marine Corps Reserves. He opened the hatch. The loader's hatch can be opened from the inside or the outside. Otherwise, the crew couldn't get in. The TC and the driver's hatches are only accessible from inside. The officers ordered Nelson to surrender, but he refused to respond. If he was wearing a CVC and had the engine revved, he might not even have known the police were there. Shawn began rocking the tank back and forth in an attempt to free it from the median. Paxton's partner, Officer Richard Piner, leaned in and shot Nelson. The bullet entered through Nelson's neck. Now the police had to climb down into the turret and drag Shawn out of the driver's seat. It's very cramped inside a tank, and the passage to the driver's compartment is just 1 person wide. Nelson later died at the Sharp Memorial Hospital. Despite the widespread property destruction, he was the only fatality reported during the rampage. Questions were raised as to whether it was necessary for the police to kill Nelson. Police Captain Tom Hall said that if Nelson had managed to free the tank, he could have taken out 35 or 40 vehicles that were all on the other side of the highway from where he was. And with traffic not moving, well, everybody would have been a sitting target. Police also said if less lethal action, such as tear gas, were used, this might have taken out Nelson, but not the tank. The officers would not have been able to enter the tank if it were still mobile and encased in a cloud of tear gas. This is a constant sore spot for me and a lot of people from law enforcement. Whenever reporters talk about things like tear gas or tasers or rubber bullets, they will call them less than lethal or non-lethal. There's no such thing as a less than lethal or non-lethal weapon. It's a less lethal weapon. That simply means that it's not like getting hit with a bullet. It might not kill you, but it still might. People die from being tased all the time. They fall forward, they hit their head, and it kills them. People die from getting hit with those beanbag rounds. If you hit a person in the wrong spot, say the center of the chest, it's enough force it could stop a person's heart. So they are not non-lethal. They're not less than lethal. They are simply less lethal. And now back to the story. Officials were seriously considering asking for help from the Marine Corps at Camp Pendleton. They were going to ask for a Bell AH-1 Cobra attack helicopter. That would have been really interesting in a crowded highway. Shawn was driving a giant weapon around town, and this made him a very dangerous person. You can't really say he was unarmed. He was driving his weapon. I'm sure he realized this trip was going to be the end of his life. He'd been talking about suicide for some time leading up to his road trip. There is a thing called suicide by cop. Folks who want to end their lives, but they don't have the wherewithal to actually pull the trigger. So, they drive around until some unsuspecting officer pulls them over. As the officer approaches, the driver pulls a gun. The officer does what they're trained to do. The outcome is one dead citizen who people all say there's no way this person would have tried to shoot a cop. They're not trying to kill somebody, they're trying to get themselves killed. That's why it's called suicide by cop. If you aim a gun at a cop, even if it's a toy gun, there's a very good chance you're going to get shot, and you just might die. My advice is don't do stupid things like that. Anyway, some people just don't realize. Officials at the Armory, where Nelson stole the tank, were criticized for what appeared to be a huge lapse in security, especially considering the attack at Oklahoma City had only been a month previous. In addition to the open unguarded gate to the vehicle lot, the fence surrounding the lot had damaged barbed wire in some places. Residents near the Armory said that even if the gate had been locked, Nelson could have simply clomb the fence in sections where the barbed wire was damaged. Nobody thinks about these things until it's too late. Armory officials said that only a few people were given keys to the vehicles, that the vehicles were kept far away from the fence to make them difficult to reach, that only somebody with prior knowledge and training could operate and even start a tank, and there was just no way to foresee such an event taking place. After Nelson's theft of the tank, security was tightened at the Kearney Mesa Armory. Now, there's no key to a tank. You start it using other means that I won't go into, like I said, in case somebody wants to try and steal one, but there is no key to the tank. Instead, what you've got is a padlock up on the loader's hatch. You need a key to the padlock. Since it appears that Shawn did not have the key to the padlock, somebody may have forgot to put the lock on. It's kind of like the keys to a jet, but that's another story. Okay, I've got a little time. It's a common practice in the Navy and in the Air Force that they will send some new airman or some new Navy guy to get the keys to a jet. And the new guy will walk all over the ship or the air base asking people, where's the key to that jet? And they'll be sent to various locations. And they'll spend the whole day walking around asking everybody, where's the key to the jet? And of course, everybody will laugh at the person once they're no longer there. It's right up there with going to get a bucket of prop wash or taking a bucket of water up to the water table on a drilling rig, which fortunately I never fell for that one. It's one thing to get mad, but it's another thing to get so mad that you're willing to destroy property of those around you who had nothing to do with the reason you're mad. It's just wrong in so many ways. Driving over vehicles can be fun, but not at the expense of others. In 2018, an Army National Guard officer stole an armored personnel carrier, and he led authorities on a 60-mile chase. Joshua Philip Yabut took an M577 armored personnel carrier, which is used for a tactical operations center, and he drove along the highway while police chased him, trying to get him to stop. An M113 is used for troops. A 577 is a larger version used as a mobile command center. The top speed of an M577 is about 40 miles an hour, just a little bit faster than a tank. Joshua Philip Yabet, 29, of Richmond, was arrested for driving under the influence of drugs and charged with eluding police and unauthorized use of a vehicle, according to Virginia State Police. The 29-year-old was being held in Virginia's Central State Hospital, which is a psychiatric hospital. He managed to call the Associated Press, and he told them that he had been authorized to take the vehicle on a pre-planned route as part of a training exercise to gauge the police response. Yabet told reporters his brigade commander, who declined to name, told him to take the 577 armored personnel carrier from Fort Pickett. The officer denied claims by authorities that he was under the influence of drugs during the chase. A spokesman for the Virginia National Guard disputed Yabet's claim and said the officer was not authorized to drive the personnel carrier off Fort Pickett to any location for any reason. After being stolen from Fort Pickett, state police said the personnel carrier was driven east on Route 460, then north on Interstate 95, hitting a maximum speed of about 40 miles per hour as authorities tried to pull the vehicle over. Yabet eventually surrendered near Richmond City Hall. As he was driving, Yabet was posting photographs and a video to Twitter while in the military vehicle. After police began the pursuit shortly at 8 p.m., Yabet posted a photo and video of himself inside the stolen vehicle. He wrote a series of odd tweets later, including, "Where is this damn water buffalo? All I want to do is get an anime wife," and "Wow, I think I just discovered a large illegal spy operation in the U.S. government." A water buffalo is a huge container on wheels used in the military to haul water. Yeah, for those that didn't know. The Virginia National Guard said in a news release that Yabet is the first lieutenant, or rather he was a first lieutenant, assigned as the commander of the Petersburg Base Headquarters Company, 276th Engineer Battalion, and that he had 11 years of service. The 29-year-old was deployed to Afghanistan from 2008 to 2009 with the Illinois National Guard. While the vehicle was not equipped with any weapons, Yabet did have his personal weapon with him, but he didn't have any ammunition. In the military, if you're issued a pistol, you're issued a pistol. They don't give you the ammunition, especially if you're in the States. You have to get the ammunition only when you go to the range to shoot, unless there's a national emergency, in which case, then you might get your bullets. We are extremely grateful that there were no injuries as a result of this incident, and we appreciate the great work of the Virginia State Police, Richmond Police Department, and other law enforcement and first responders who safely brought this situation to a close. Major General Timothy P. Williams, the Adjutant General of the Virginia National Guard, said, "We have initiated our own internal investigation, and we will determine appropriate action once the investigation is complete." In February, Yabet filed papers to run as an independent candidate for the U.S. Senate. And looking at the Senate today, he just might have won. Joshua Philip Yabet was deemed delusional by mental health experts when he took a nearly 12-ton vehicle from Fort Pickett on a joyride that ended in downtown Richmond. Yabet was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Clinical psychologists determined Yabet was suffering from psychosis and not legally responsible for his actions when he led police on the 65-mile pursuit that ended in Richmond Capitol Square June 5, 2018. I've always suspected officers, especially lieutenants, were off upstairs, but now I know. Recently, some folks in Atlanta stole a couple of APCs, or armored personnel carriers, and drove them around town. Yes, it's fun to drive armor. And keep in mind, you get lousy mileage. An M60 tank holds 380 gallons of diesel. This gives them a 300-mile operating range. That's less than a mile per gallon. An APC or tank is a very conspicuous vehicle. They're very hard to hide in town. They don't fit into most garages. People see them and they know you're not supposed to have them. If a person steals an armored vehicle, the police are going to come, and since the ammo was never kept with the vehicle, the most you can do is drive around and make people mad at you, especially if you run over their cars. Most armored vehicles are very slow. No matter what you grab, the authorities are going to show up with something bigger and badder and faster. Now, I know an M1 tank will go 72 miles an hour. You're not going to get your hands on an M1 tank. Too many people act without thinking. They steal something because it's there, and they don't steal it because they need it or they can use it. They steal things not thinking they're going to get caught. They try to cheat, not realizing those in charge already know all the tricks out there. Too much action without enough thinking. It's one thing to get caught up in a mob of violence and do things, but how about those folks who sit down and they plan their actions? Marvin Heemeyer spent months and a lot of money before he set out on his final adventure. If Walmart or Target lose too much inventory, they'll just raise the prices and we'll all get to pay for it in the long run. If you damage a small business, well, that small business will probably go out of business because they can't afford to lose inventory. If you steal military equipment, the armories will just become less accessible. And when something is needed, like during a flood or a hurricane, they're going to take a lot longer to come to your rescue. It's going to be a lot harder to save people's lives when things are a lot harder to get a hold of. And so, mostly people that do crazy things like this, all they're doing is they're hurting all of us. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your friends. If you have any ideas for shows you'd like to hear about, you can contact me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murder 3? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?